Good afternoon, Net Inclusion, Charlotte 2019. You have made it to a session about Census 2020 and how we are going to approach it. There are many different ways of going about it here on the panel. There are some unifying themes. We're going to have a situation where you can ask some questions if they're super brief. If it's the kind of question that will take some explaining, we're going to put it in a parking lot and get it at the end. But our format today is pretty simple. Stacey Carless is going to do a Census 101, and then we're going to talk about some of the issues, and then some implementation. And it's going to go pretty smoothly and very quickly. Just to get a sense of who is in the room. Folks from government, could you raise your hand? Okay. Libraries? Okay. What were the other ones, Kathy, that you thought would be good? Nonprofits? Yeah. Okay, a lot of folks. A lot of folks. Okay, great. That gives us academia. Aha. Anything we didn't shout out?
Funders. Wow. We love you.
In the green, in the back, a private corporation.
Yeah, private sector. Funders.
Well, I'm glad you could all make it through the snow apocalypse of this morning to join us here. Stacey, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Let's go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stacey Carless, and I am the Executive Director of the NC Counts Coalition. And the coalition was established in 2017 to prepare North Carolina for the 2020 census. We serve as a hub to facilitate cross-sector coordination among government, planning, and community organizations, service providers, businesses, and others to achieve a complete and accurate count for North Carolina. And if you'd like more information on our organization, I encourage you to visit our website, nccensus.org. As of today, we are exactly 365 days out from Census Day 2020, and census preparation is in full swing across the country. Yesterday, census advocates across the country kicked off a national day of advocacy for complete, fair, and accurate 2020 census count of every individual in the United States. To learn more about the 2020 census advocacy and outreach initiatives across the country, I encourage you to check out the National Census Counts website, which is censuscounts.org. So today I'm going to provide you all with a brief introduction of the 2020 census and share with you a little bit of information throughout my presentation in regards to what's happening in North Carolina. So with that, this is just our leadership structure in North Carolina for the census. Hopefully you could see that. But the top gear is the NC Complete Count Commission, which was established by Governor Roy Cooper in 2018. And those are community leaders across the state who meet to strategize about the census and report back to the governor to let him know what needs to happen. The bottom gear is the U.S. Census Bureau, which are, they're going to implement the census. The census is their baby ultimately. So they're going to hire, they're going to create policy, and they're going to determine how the census operates. And in the middle is the NC Counts Coalition. And we consider ourselves to be the connectors, the conveners, and the coordinators in North Carolina for the 2020 census. So we're in the middle because I believe that we keep everything going and everyone connected. So why is the census important? 3 reasons pretty much. First is political power, right? It's all about money and power. So first you've got your political representation. Next is your federal funding. And last but not least is your community planning and economic development. This map just gives you an idea of states that are expected to gain a seat or lose a seat pursuant to the 2020 census. As you can see, North Carolina is expected to gain. Most of the states in the Northeast or Mid-North are expected to lose a seat. Southern states are expected to gain. So, you know, the census is essentially the core of our democracy, right? Our democracy demands it, and Article 1, Section 2 says we have to do it. You have to count every individual. And this is how our political power is determined in the United States. So it's a huge deal for a lot of states. Next is federal funding. So there's about $800 billion a year that the federal government disperses pursuant to the census. In North Carolina, we receive about $16.29 billion a year. And this just gives you a breakdown as to where that funding goes into health, education, housing, human services, and transportation. When you talk about your transit systems and FTA, where do buses go? That information is guided from the census. When we're talking about social welfare programs such as S-CHIP or maybe Section 8 housing vouchers, that's going to come from your census numbers as well. In North Carolina, that 16.29 comes out to about $1,600 per person. And that's $16,000 per person over a 10-year period. So just to put that in perspective for you, in North Carolina, we have 100 counties. So just imagine missing one person in every county, how much money that is for our state. And last but not least, as I mentioned, it's going to determine key decisions for business folks and for businesses that are relocating. When businesses are looking to come to a state, they're going to want to know who's there, what's the makeup, what's the population, where are people located, as well as when your community leaders or elected officials are determining where to place a hospital or what resources to provide to a school. They're going to this census data to make all of those important decisions. So now I'm going to touch on the challenges, and our panel is going to get a little bit more in depth with our challenges. But just to let you know what they are, you've got historical undercounts of hard to count communities, inadequate and late funding, the digital divide, and the citizenship question. So I'll start with the digital divide just to touch on it, but the U.S. Census Bureau is rolling back door-to-door canvassing and focusing more on internet-based responses, and this is the first time that this will be done. This will affect obtaining an accurate count of communities that may not have access to the internet. For North Carolina, that means about 24% of our community will be affected by the digital divide. Next is the inadequate and late funding. So it has not been funded. The Congress did not fund the census appropriately for this cycle. And for that reason, the census had to cut back on its end-to-end testing. So typically the census does end-to-end testing in different markets just to see how the operation works and to fix any flaws before the big, Super Bowl day of April 1st of 2020. Unfortunately, that did not happen this cycle because there just wasn't enough funding. So there were 3 field tests, end-to-end tests scheduled, and they had to cut 2 of them, one in West Virginia and one in Washington State. And this was intended to test a new IT-focused census and to test internet census counting techniques. So there was only 1 field test in Rhode Island. And I'll also just add, with that single field test that they had in Rhode Island, they did not test the highly controversial citizenship question. So this funding has really affected the census operation to date, just to prepare, and it will certainly affect what happens next year in April. Next, I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about hard to count communities. And your hard to count communities are typically going to be children, Latin American, Hispanic communities, Native Americans, Black African Americans, immigrants, and renters. So hard to count communities are typically individuals who may have a distrust of government. They may not have access to the internet. They might move around a lot. Several different characteristics can make a community or a population hard to count. The children population, we really don't have a reason as to why children are undercounted. It's actually interesting because a lot of households that have children, they respond to the census, but they just don't count their children. But that is a huge issue that a lot of research is going into. CountAllKids.org has a great plan in place to make sure that our children are counted. So I encourage you to check out that resource as well. And if you want to know where your hard to count communities are located so that you could target your outreach, in North Carolina, we just rolled out an interactive mapping tool yesterday, and it's on our website, and you could go in and see by census tract where the hard to count communities are in our state. And if you are here outside of North Carolina, then you could visit Cooney's map. And I'm sorry, I don't have the web address for this, but if you're interested, I could provide it to you outside of the panel discussion. And you know, this map is really a great resource. You can go in, you can put in your state, you can put in your zip code, you can put in your county, however you would like to search, and it will tell you the demographics of that community, as well as it will tell you where the hardest to count communities are located in your area. And last but not least is the citizenship question. This is the actual question that will be on the 2020 census. And maybe, that's right, maybe. It is scheduled to go to the Supreme Court late April for the Supreme Court to make a final decision on this question, but this is the proposed question, I'll say. And of course, you know, this is going to be an increased cost to the already inadequately funded census operation, as well as there's going to be a decrease in response rate. With the current political climate and everything going on with ICE raids happening in different communities, I know in North Carolina in February, there were multiple ICE raids within a 2-week period where more than 200 undocumented individuals were picked up. So this citizenship question is just adding fuel to the fire. You already have hard to count communities, but now you want to put on this question to take out the inclusivity of the census. And to wrap it up, I just want to point out some key dates for you. This is everything kind of happening in 2019. What's probably of most interest is 2020. April 1st, 2020 is Census Day, but that day is only for reference. In late March, 95% of households will receive their census invitation in the mail to respond to the census, and 5% of households will receive their census invitation when an actual enumerator drops by the house and drops it off. And less than 1% of households will be counted in person by a census taker instead of being invited to respond on their own. And that's going to happen in very remote parts of areas like northern Maine, remote Alaska, and in select American Indian areas that ask to be counted in person. Areas that are less likely to respond online will receive a paper questionnaire along with their invitation. And the invitation will also include information about how to respond online or by phone. So late March is when folks will start getting information. Between March 16th to the 24th, they'll get a reminder letter. Between March 26th to April 3rd, they'll get another reminder postcard if they still haven't responded. And then from April 8th to April 16th, they'll send out another reminder with a questionnaire saying, hey, you still haven't responded. And then April 20th to 27th, they're going to send out their final reminder. After the end of April, individuals who have not, or households that have not responded to the census, they'll start deploying their enumerators and they'll knock on doors and ask people to take the census. And census results will be delivered to the president on December 31st of 2020. And with that, that is my presentation. Thank you.
And Stacey's slides were already up, I saw on the website. So to get all of this detailed information. So thanks for choosing to attend our workshop. My name is Pettit. I'm with the Urban Institute, which is a policy research organization in Washington, D.C. But I'm really here as the director of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, and that is organizations in 32 cities that collect and organize local administrative data and help their stakeholders, whether it's nonprofits or government agencies or foundations, use that data to improve their communities. So they're locally embedded organizations like you all. And we've been thinking a lot about their role in the 2020 census. So we have been funded by the Annie Casey Foundation to encourage all local data and civic tech organizations about their role that they have, a really special role in helping their communities be very strategic about the outreach that needs to be done. So I'm happy to talk more about NIP with anyone outside of the workshop, but just to cycle back specifically to the 2020 census, there's a lot of diverse organizations in the room, but to overcome that quite intimidating list of challenges we're all going to have to pull together. Every organization may have a little bit different role depending on your mission and capacity, but thinking about what you can contribute to your community's complete count is really my main goal for today. So the complete count committees Bureau will be doing some mass marketing and some advertising, and will be good at it. But to really make progress, you need to get to these hard to count communities. You need to think about what neighborhoods and groups should be prioritized in outreach, and then who are the voices that can reach those groups. And that's going to be different for every place. So to get started, you should first go to the census.org/partner and sign up to be a census partner organization. So that doesn't commit you, I promise, to anything in particular, but it does get you on the mailing list so that you can get updates, get resources. They have a lot of things already planned, so that will get you connected nationally. And then the next thing you need to do is find out, like Stacey's graph there at the beginning, what's the organization, who's the sort of hub in your city or county or region locally. So most places have a complete count committee that they've formed. You know, honestly, some are more effective than others, which people can talk about. And there may be community complete count committees. Your funders might have gotten together and gotten these organized. So we're not expecting you to lead the charge in anything in particular. It's going to be a group. It's going to be a group effort, and you should be able to plug in. The other piece before I talk about specifics, and Sabrina's keeping on time for me. Okay. I could talk for hours, but I won't take up more than my time. But the other plug before I start talking about the Get Out the Count efforts is that the Census Bureau needs to hire 500,000 people this fall, and a workforce that knows your neighborhoods is going to be the key to all that enumerators and Get Out the Count. So to the extent where you have publicity or newsletters or outreach efforts to try to get people interested in these jobs, which can be part-time, people that know the languages, people that know the neighborhoods, is going to be a huge bonus come, feels like far away, but come May through July when they're doing that enumerator count. So please help with that effort too. It's even harder when it's a more robust economy. So the first thing that I want that all of you can do is to educate your complete count committee or whoever the hub about the implications for your communities of the internet choice option for the first time. So you will be able to answer by can you guys hear me? You will be able to answer by internet, form, or phone, but it is quite intimidating with a lot of the language that's floating around. Somebody today asked me, oh, you mean we'll be able to answer by paper still? So I think there's a lot of misinformation, and you know more than anyone from working with people on the ground, the sort of how this is resonating with the folks, the individuals that you work with every day. So I don't think that all complete count committees don't necessarily have that perspective or viewpoint. point, depending on how they were put together. You can also help target the outreach. So if you work in particular neighborhoods, or you work with the Cambodian community or other people with disabilities or older adults, whatever your expertise is in, you can contribute that as being an outreach to that particular group will be really helpful. The national hard to count map is fantastic, but it's a 5-year average from the American Community Survey at the tract level. So tracts are big, you know the micro areas, and 5 years is a long time in neighborhood life in a lot of places. So you know what areas have changed that the national data may not be, or housing, public housing unit in the middle of an affluent area, for example, and that might get lost in that national data. So trust your judgment and local knowledge to supplement the national maps. But if you are savvy, read those maps. The community could definitely use help to navigate. You just look at a lot of different colors, and you're not sure which does this mean for my strategy, and helping people think through that and walk through that with, through the local perspective would be a great role if you're able to do that. The other piece, I think for many of you who do training, it would be great for you to really incorporate awareness of the census into your training for the residents or the people that you help. So we're, very concerned about phishing and fake census sites, for example. So if you can help teach people how to watch for, for fake sites or social media passing around fake links or all that disinformation, we hope to, we expect to be floating around. It can be really a great help. And then just to both, I would say to wrap up, just promote both the groups that you're already working with and these digital inclusion partnerships I've been hearing about all day. So if you can get those organizations also involved. The number one reason in the survey that Census gave that people would respond was this resource question. Does it fund my schools, my Medicaid, my Head Start? But only about 45% of people knew that the census drove those dollars. So just by saying for your state, so those numbers for North Carolina are available for every state. So you can find out how much money is going to your state because of the census. And just sharing that number in itself with people will make a big difference, because that, as it makes sense to all of us, that there's something in it for me and my community, and you can help spread that message. So just for you to reach out, I know most of you are strapped and overwhelmed and will make a big difference. Working 60 hours a week in your nonprofit. A real difference if you get involved.
Hi. Good, you guys can hear me. Great. So we were joking that the census is like the most exciting topic of the day. But actually, the census can be a perfect tool of bureaucratic destruction if we don't get it together and strategize. So it's actually a very exciting topic. So really glad to see you all here today. My name is Greta Byrum, and I am the co-director of the Digital Equity Laboratory at the New School University in New York City. And I'm also the co-chair of the New York Counts 2020 Tech and Tools Committee. And so New York Counts 2020 is a coalition led by the New York Immigration Coalition, which has about 200 member organizations statewide. And in our capacity as co-chairs, Megan McDermott from the Mozilla Foundation and I, we've been looking at this question of digital access and how do we create digital access across the state of New York. And I think, that focus came from really looking at the situation of, what happens when a really huge government process becomes digital. I mean, we remember the ACA, right? Remember what happened when Obamacare rolled out and healthcare.gov? Does everybody remember that? Raise your hand if you remember. Everybody remembers. Well, we all work on digital literacy, so we understand, digital access. We understand what happens. And I wanted to just say that, yes, there is a digital choice, and the Census Bureau talks a lot about that digital choice. However, the anticipation and the funding is set at a level of 80% of people who are not living in group housing or in the military are expected to respond online. 20% of people are expected to respond via paper. So, in fact, the budgeting is such that if we have too many people asking for paper, there won't be enough funding for it. Unless we can get further allocations down the line. Now, I want to check that statistic because, that's the initial estimate is 80-20, but I think it may have come down after the end-to-end test. But, the fact is that there is not enough funding to do paper surveys for everybody who might want to do paper surveys. So the other thing that we're looking at is that, as far as the public's access to the internet, the Census Bureau has not created any sort of, there's no funding for public-facing access. And there's also no funding for guidelines or standards, et cetera, for how people should create public-facing access. There's basically, the line from the Census Bureau is that everybody should provide census participation access at libraries, at nonprofits. Basically, everybody open your doors, share your internet connection. Now, as somebody who's been working in the field of digital access and digital literacy for many years, when I hear that, I instantly get really worried. And that's because of a lot of questions. There's the question of, even if you can get online, are you going to have a hard time with things like forms? Are you going to be able to use a mouse? Are you going to be able to, what are you going to do if there's a pop-up on your screen? There's a lot of questions, like what we know happens when people get online for the first time. And those questions haven't been answered, and part of that is because, as Kathy pointed out, there's only been one end-to-end test. And at the time when it happened in Rhode Island, which was, I think, last spring or last summer? Yeah, last spring, the IT systems were not complete. So we're going to go to April 1st, 2020, without testing some of the IT systems, which is why the former director of the Census Bureau stepped down. So there's a lot of mistrust, there's a lot of nervousness in communities, as you can imagine. We feel, as the New York Counts 2020 Coalition, that yes, the citizenship question is absolutely a barrier and a challenge, but so is literacy and digital access, almost as much of a challenge. And that perspective has been missing in a lot of the national reporting. So you don't hear about this problem when you read, listen to NPR, read the New York Times. And it's not for lack of trying, because I've definitely tried to get this to reporters. So if you know any reporters, somebody needs to talk about digital access and digital literacy as a key question surrounding the census. So we decided we could possibly add value and help with this situation of digital equity to do a risk assessment. So a risk assessment approach is both to ask what are the risks of people not participating in the census? Why would they not participate? What would keep them away? And then also, what are the risks of participating? So we're looking at both sides of that coin. And so we'll have some findings and recommendations coming out in about 2 weeks around that. But we looked at, for example, the Census Bureau, is this really secure? Can people, rely on the security and privacy of their information. They will tell you, well, we have an HTTPS secure portal, and that's the answer. Like, our servers are secure. So, that, as Kathy was saying, that does not negate the possibility of fake or malicious websites. And, we've already heard of a case in New York City, or sorry, it was actually upstate New York, where somebody got a postcard that sent them to a malicious website, and they put a lot of data into it. So that's already happening. We also are concerned about data sharing. So, frankly, there's been reporting that the Department of Homeland Security is sharing data to the Census Bureau. Now, Census Bureau is protected by Article 19 of the U.S. Code. So census workers are not allowed to divulge any data based on Article 19. However, if DHS shares data to the Census Bureau, the Census Bureau can use it, and it starts to triangulate data sets in a way that we're a little concerned about, actually quite concerned about. The other thing is that everybody's responses will be geocoded. So whether you're filling in the response from your computer, or if an enumerator is filling it out, they're all going to be geocoded and tagged to specific latitude and longitude. So that starts to create a bunch of data sets. Oh, and the DHS information, I should say that data sharing agreement is not finalized. It was reported on. We're not sure exactly what's going on with it, but it seems like if the citizenship question does not pass, there still is a chance that cross-referencing data across data sets a more targeted picture of individuals. Now, all of that said, we know how high the stakes are. So how do we actually create a situation where people feel safe and confident so that we can give funding to the people who need it? And what I mean by a bureaucratic destruction is that we're in a little bit of a catch-22 situation, where there's a lot of risk, and how do you set up an access system that only goes to the Census Bureau's portal and that clears the data after every use? How to having it to ensure that everything's running right. That includes data management guidelines. A lot of CBOs are thinking, oh, people are going to come in here and give up their information for a little bit more information. So things like that, like if you have a fully secure situation, digital situation at your community-based organization, please do not collect extra data. It's a bad idea. And also, have protocols for purging or deleting data regularly, things like data management. And if you're working with private sector partners and they're saying, take these tablets to go out and do outreach in your community, making sure that they understand that data has to come off of the so data management. And then we're going to produce some holistic resources like volunteer or staff guidelines so that people libraries will not have enough staff to sit with every person and do this. So I think those are most of the kinds of products that we're going to deliver around April, May, June. And I just wanted to finally say that I think there is a lot of concerned about talking about these risks because people are afraid that folks will get nervous and won't participate in the census. But I think I would argue that on the flip side, it actually creates more confidence among the community. We say, yes, we take your security and your safety seriously, and that's why we're taking precautions. And so based on that belief, we plan to basically brand what we're producing so that folks can say, look, we've actually gone through this process, gone through this checklist, and we are providing you with a public-facing site that takes into consideration. You know, it could be any branding. I'm not going to need to be our branding, but just to provide an extra layer that says, you know, we're an independent agent and we're taking these precautions for you. So that's what I have. I'm going to pass it.
Work, which is to find, to identify people and communities that typically don't vote, that typically don't participate civically. Multiple sessions that I've been to today do talk about the important role that you all have played in increasing civic participation in the communities we work with. And my job as a data manager is to help support community-based organizations in being able to do multiple layers of this work, which is to strategize around civic participation, to know the landscape of their state, of their region, to use that information and have solid, tested, and shared messaging that everyone agrees can work to mobilize people to civically participate, to use tactics that have been proven to work, secure servers, and to use those tactics wisely as well, and then to evaluate the work and do some experimentation to figure out whether the work that we all do an ecosystem that many of you might be familiar with. How many of you have done Get Out the Vote work at all at any stage? Awesome, okay, go you. So I'm very, very, very pleased to see so many hands raised. And even if you haven't, I think maybe you have. You know, maybe you have talked to your neighbors and done some relational organizing and asked them if they're getting out to the polls. So that entire infrastructure that has taken many, many years to build on a nationwide scale is a similar infrastructure that, you know, we believe should be used for getting out the count. And so I think what I can do today is to talk a little bit around our thinking as the civic engagement table in New York, where, you know, how we've thought about that infrastructure and how to transition it into getting out the count. How to account for all sorts of new considerations that come about when you're doing census work, where you're not just talking to registered voters and talking to other folks too, other folks that we want to make sure they manage and handle their data. And basically how we can bring more organizations, or I guess more stakeholders into the fold, so that what we're doing is being strategic and meting out the vote, and then how our plan translates to getting out the count, and hopefully you can take snippets of that and think about ways to introduce some of those strategies that have worked so well for voter registration and voter education, and use that to help inform a public education and civic participation campaign that you'll be doing in your region, right? So, so typically, what we'll do with getting out the vote is we'll start with by strategizing, deciding on what are shared metrics, right? So what is it that we want to measure that will be important for us to get to know our region and get to know how we can make use of our limited resources, right? How many of you have limited resources? Sit down, I can actually only call 100 people. So who are the best 100 people to call right now, right? And so we're always asking ourselves that question. So in voter engagement and getting out the vote work, we're looking at folks who have low propensity, history of not voting, and folks that belong in communities that have a voter registration and turnout gap. So we've often mapped out, just like a hard to count map, but map out regions where there's a gap between people of color and everyone else in terms of voter registration, between low income folks and everyone else, turnout, and using that to decide where it is that we may start to do our work. And so translating kind of that, some of those strategic thinking where you're like looking at a landscape, we've kind of already touched on a couple of resources that you might be able to areas or some of the same areas that lack access to internet tells you that those areas are just living layers upon layers, right? And on top of that, those are also the areas that are inhabited by low-income folks and people of color who have other barriers to entry. And so making decisions using data is very crucial, and I know all of you are familiar with doing that. The next step, typically in our Get Out the Vote campaign work, is to start with a data set of people, right? So like know the people that are in your membership, know the people that come into your doors, and start with them first, right? So often in Get Out the Vote work, we'll start by reaching out to the people who, the communities or the organizations have already registered to vote, because that's a starting point. So does anyone want to throw out an example of like what's a touch point, what's that initial starting point in your particular organization? I'll take like 2 examples just to make it interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, those are people who you've established a sense of trust with already. Yeah, and let's get another example just to get a sense. Just the way yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, and so perhaps we can think of the hurdles that we experience as a community and the hurdles in your region, but definitely, and then move on to the people that have the greatest barriers in your region. And so moving on to that, I think that our plan for New York State, we're thinking of consolidating a couple of data sets, including voter file data and also USPS data into a secure space, so that the 60 organizations that we work with can ensure that they're not duplicating their work. And so finding a safe place to be able to convene and decide on areas that you'll work in, so that you can have the greatest amount of impact in your region, knowing that you're probably the most trusted messenger in that region, and knowing that with your limited resources, you can contact 100 people. Who is it that that you should contact, and so that you can make just impact as a whole. And so after consolidating data sets, another suggestion, another thing I learned from getting out the vote is to standardize some messaging. or at least use some of the conclusions of getting out the vote and kind of questions when you're starting a conversation can help motivate someone to do something that they're not feeling so great about, aka voting or possibly filling out the census. Using those interactions to survey, to ask people if they know about whether the census funds their education, as we've mentioned, and also asking them a very specific question like, how do they plan to go and get themselves counted. The mirror in getting out the vote is we typically ask them, when do you plan to go to vote? Because making a plan and then maybe even opening up a discussion to what plans are risky or what plans are less risky for them, and being able to engage in that discussion. It's just something that that we've learned from doing that work, and we hope to extend to getting out the count widely. And one last thing that we're doing is we usually use phone calling, texting, and door knocking systems that connect directly to the database of people that we're working with. But one thing we're trying to pilot for the census is a distributed organizing tool. So one example is there's a tool called Reach. I don't work for them. I'm just like looking into them, and I would say that if you have any sort of capability to like load your data sets into a distributed organizing tool, you can add all of your volunteers to a tool like this, have an event, survey people as they come, keep that data, and then know, kind of understand trends in where you're working. And overall, the mission, the reason why we do that is we want to be able to work together to not duplicate efforts, to understand where people are at, as far as like how they perceive of the census, how ready they are for the census, and I'm totally getting the almost. And yes, and then to be able to use that data, as we all know how valuable data is, use that data to understand, what kinds of trends are going on in your neighborhood, and to even validate that data with like the census data that you get later. All of this, of course, I'm not endorsing that anyone collect anything other than, are you going to fill out the census? What time of the day are you going to fill it out? Did you know that the census funds this? Because, we want to be able to get that broader picture. So anyway, that's my perspective, and I think that we're really excited to, test all these tools out and see whether getting out the vote can translate to getting out the counts. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. So we've got about 7 minutes for questions. I do want to know, show of hands, who in the room is working on the census? Fantastic. Who is now thinking about working on the census that was maybe considering it before? Okay, got it. Oh, that's a lot. That's good. Okay, cool. Of folks in the room, who is already thinking about get out the vote and census and how those can learn from each other? Fantastic.
Just a comment that getting the get out the vote and the get out the count happening at the same time. So this will be in the heat of the presidential election, where people will be receiving a lot of different kinds of messages. So that is one complication on the communication side, that there'll be a lot of people possibly coming to people's doors.
I have a process question.
Yes.
I thought we had 90 minutes. No. Oh, okay. So we only have like 5 minutes for questions. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Not that I'm advocating for this, but the internet online version will be mobile friendly. Okay, that's fine.
Do you want to?
Okay.
There will be a mobile version.
Everybody, please ask your local reporters, which I know there aren't many anymore. So please ask every reporter you know to tell the Census Bureau that they have to start releasing that information because we've seen the paper tests, but we have not seen the mobile version. And that's not a test, it's a survey, I'm sorry.
Hey there.
A little bit of a related question about process. So organizations that are thinking about being outreach partners and reaching folks about responding to the census, what is that process going to be like? So in the past, we received the survey at home, you open it, and you fill it out. But with the digital option, what is that going to look like? Is it coming in a postcard, the link? Is it what does that process look like if you have information about that?
Yeah, so you'll get a mailer and it'll have a URL on it. And you'll be asked to go to the URL and go from there, basically. And it'll have a unique code, but you don't need to use that unique code. Like if you go to the library to fill it out, you'll be able to fill it out even if you don't have that code. But that's the process. One more thing on the mobile, because this came up around the counting children. One thing we heard anecdotally about the Rhode Island test is that one reason that people didn't count as all of their children was because they had to scroll through a bunch of screens to do it, and people got tired of scrolling through screens. So another thing we're trying to prepare for is UX or user interface challenges, like scrolling through too many screens, but we just don't know yet.
And that's the postcard issue. With you saying that there's already been a fraudulent postcard sent out. How can people tell what's fraudulent and what's not fraudulent? Yes. Okay. Over here.
Just to flag that everyone will eventually, they say, get a form. So if you haven't answered after the 6th try, they will send a form on the 6th mailer. So that's the plan.
Money runs out, do you know?
I mean, I'm confident that they will manage to mail out all the forms. So they have, I was in the Census Bureau Thursday and Friday, so I was looking over all their plans and budgeting. So I do think that is an option, but that doesn't help people getting confused or waiting or not seeing their neighbor doesn't get one or pieces like that.
Greta, you didn't use the word, I wrote down geocaching. I know that's not the word you said, but when you were talking about when people were feeling they were going to do
Geotagging or geocoding.
So what does that necessarily mean? Because if I get my postcard but decide to fill it out in Virginia, is that going to make a difference? Or what does geotagging does? I guess that's my question.
No, it's not. It's wherever you fill it out, that generates metadata, which is like the data about what you're doing, like your activity. So if you're filling it out digitally, it will either take your IP address, or if you're doing it on a mobile device, it could also take GPS information. So it's the same. It's like location services, like how Google Maps finds you.
But that's not how they'll count you by your address that you enter in. So, I mean, there's a privacy question about keeping information about your location. I think is that issue. But when you get counted, they'll count you by the address that you enter.
Are there going to be tools available that don't allow for that geotagging? No.
I mean, paper surveys, but
paper.
yeah. Or VPN. Well, anyway, another thing to say is that before we go into that rabbit hole too far, is that just to note there are a lot of different automated processes that are being added in this census that, so we're talking about the digital access layer. That doesn't mention that they're going to automate a lot of the enumeration, process. So that'll be sort of how Amazon drivers, that system's automated, and there's also going to be machine learning. So one reason they're taking that location services information, that digital, marker of where you are, is to help make sure that the models that they're building are accurate. So there's a lot of automation and algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence that are going into the whole burrito.
So here we are at 30 minutes after. If anyone has additional pressing questions, please come on up and talk with us.
And I'll just, they have regional specialists in each region that you can reach out to. There may be the equivalent of Fryda and Greta where in your state or in your community so that you can plug in and learn. And the Census Counts website will eventually, it's not there yet, it looked like, but have state pages about that will list those state pieces too. So to, so you can figure out how to connect and not duplicate and coordinate with what else is going on.
So sorry. Another quick thing. Okay, so the funding situation, I think one thing we didn't mention is that it's not just federal representation that's determined, it's also state representation. And right now, a lot of the states are making their budgeting decisions, so we are, I mean, there's a lot, yeah, okay. But then there's a lot of pressure on civil society, but not a lot of money. So that's a little call out to funders. Hey, there's a lot of organizations that are working really hard to make this happen.
And it was something. Is there a number that you had? I don't want to just say the numbers I've heard. So like it was 40. It was 40 million.
And Cuomo cut it to 20.
To 20 million. So a state like New York. Lots of different kinds of organizations took a long time to put together that 40 million number. So that can give you just some insight into what this could take in your state. And North Carolina has none.
We have a permission, but we have no funding.
You're on the lucky side.
Holy cow. Lots to build on here. Lots to build on. Thank you for coming today.